Hello and welcome to the Frontier Risks Martyn's Law presentation. The aim of this presentation is to give you some more clarity on what the requirements are for Martyn's Law, if you fall under either of the two categories of the standard or enhanced tier, also to make clear some of the commonalities between Martyn's Law and other requirements such as fire prevention and emergency planning, of which there's a large degree of commonality which will aid you in enacting the requirements of Martyn's Law and also enacting a plan that is reasonable and proportionate to your organisation and your risk. So to give you some details on Martyn's Law, to give its official title, it's the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. It was implemented in response to some shortcomings identified in the Manchester Arena bombing that occurred in May 2017. It received royal assent in April 2025, and the government has allowed a 24-month implementation period. So what this means is it should come into act in April 2027, which is when there will normally be the enaction of the SAA, who are the regulatory body, conducting inspection and enforcement regime. So in essence, it places a legal duty on qualifying premises to enact preparedness and protection measures, supported obviously with the SAA conducting an enforcement regime. It's important to note as well that there are no NACSO or Martyn's Law compliant products or services. There's lots of organisations advertising those, but it doesn't exist. It is only you, through your planning and the material you present during an inspection, that will evidence whether you're compliant or not. So you can see in this image in York, obviously this is what lots of people think of when they see Martyn's Law. He's enacting large-scale measures for public protection, such as search arches, concrete bollards and barriers. For the majority of organisations, this will not be required. It's practical measures that reinforce the human capacities that are most effective, and that is what will be required by the majority of organisations. There will be organisations at the higher end who will have to make some adjustments and incorporate physical protection measures, but by and large, for the majority of organisations, there will be a minimum requirement for adjustments and augmentations of measures in place. Understanding and having ownership of what the requirements are will allow you ultimately to have an effective plan that is compliant. So we're now going to look at demystifying terrorism, because that word blinds people. It stands out and people think, how do I manage or protect people from a terrorist attack? So terrorism is highly unusual in the fact that it's decided after the incident has occurred. So you can see the bar along the bottom. We have an incident, an investigation, and then a determination is made whether that was a terrorist attack or not. So if we look at some that have occurred, the incident at the Liverpool Women's and Children's Hospital, where the man exploded an IED inside the vehicle, that wasn't terrorism. Again, looking at Stockport, Leicester stabbings, no. So again, it's not the incident and how it happens, it is the motivation and intent behind the attack. Normally that's focused on political, religious, ideological, potentially racial reasons, normally intended to overthrow or destabilise the government and democracy. So what this means for us is treat the incident as an emergency. Put terrorism to the back of your mind, because you won't know it's a terrorist attack. That could be decided days, weeks, months, years later. And again, a decision could be even made that something wasn't, that was originally classified as such. And if we look at the hierarchy of risk there, we'll see already most organisations, fire will always sit at the top. Why? Because it's the most common occurrence. There's legislation, regulation, inspections. Underneath that, emergency planning, particularly for large organisations or ones that operate in complex industries. And you'll already have plans for these, particularly if you've got requirements under the Civil Contingencies Act. And again, crime plans. Under your security process and procedures, this could be for commercial premises, shoplifting, theft, violence, arson. Terrorism, we can see, sits outside of these. Why? Because these are the most likely things to occur. And again, there's already a large degree of commonality between those three and the requirements under Martyn's Law. And we're going to explain how you can simplify the process, use these expanding themes that you've already got to make your plan much simpler, much more cost effective, and much more effective for yourselves in terms of putting it into place and putting it into operation. But as we said, avoid that fear-driven focus on terrorism. You're focusing on a proportionate response to an emergency. And I wouldn't be surprised in the future if some adjustments are made to Martyn's Law to recognise the commonalities, particularly between fire legislation. So as we've already touched on, the common ground with fire safety, in which there are large sections of commonality between Martyn's Law and fire safety. So the first requirement, We've got a requirement to assess the risk. Second to that, evacuation, lockdown, and communications. What does that mean? Well, under fire planning, and most organisations will already have emergency plans for emergency exits, evacuating people from the premises. Also, safer refuges, evacuation, getting people moved around a building in the event of an emergency. Communication systems, be that alarms that send off different tones to indicate staying somewhere or exiting the premises. Those three, as we've seen, that's the key parts of Martyn's Law of having a plan and how to enact it to keep people safe. And again, particularly looking at when we look at safe refuges and PEEP's personal emergency evacuation plans, how do we move particular people around an area? There's also a requirement to conduct staff drills and awareness training. That's the same in Martyn's Law. So as you can see, there's a large degree of commonality, which allows you to build off your existing knowledge of fire and emergency planning to simplify the process and remove some of the mystery and fear around it. It also allows, by integrating it, to save time, cost, and complexity, because you're building off a common platform. You're ensuring the plans complement and work with one another, because particularly looking at fire, emergency exits, what's that for? An emergency. Whether it's any form of incident, people always will look for, what does the emergency exits or the emergency plan tell me to do? So making sure that your plans under Martyn's Law, evacuation, lockdown, evacuation, mirror your fire and emergency plans, because otherwise you risk also introducing vulnerabilities into your planning where they conflict with each other, making things much more difficult. It also increases the difficulty to be able to understand it and put it into motion, but also potentially exposes you to regulatory and legislatory, action taken against your organisation, because potentially you've blocked off things that would be expected under fire regulations. So again, integrating and ensuring those plans complement each other is key, not only for simplicity, but also ensuring you haven't introduced an additional vulnerability into the system. So we're now going to look at assessing the risk from terrorism. So in the UK, there is a threat level for the entire country. At the minute, substantial, state an attack is likely. What does that mean? Well, in reality, we need to put that to the back of our minds, because that's a generalist threat level for the entire country, be that Belfast, Billericay, Barton-on-Humber, Bond Street in London. So again, move that to one side and forget about that. Also, in terms of the risk assessment, this is different to a conventional health and safety one, where we'd look at likelihood and impact. Because the difference is, this isn't a hazard, a pool of water. Terrorism, it's a person doing something, it has an intent. So starting off with that, what we need to look at, well, in likelihood is, how and why are we at risk? Is that because of who we are, what we do, where we do it, why we do it, and how we do it? Our geographical location, the type of people we allow on our premises, the kind of business we conduct, do we allow contentious activity to occur? Is there something next to us that would likely be a target, which means we're exposed to that? A police station, a court, a military base. In addition to that, are we next to a large footfall for people potentially going to a sporting event? Do people gather at our premises to eat after a major concert, something similar to that, or a theatre? And also looking at the kinds of attacks. So in reality, the two most common kinds of attacks will be knife attacks and the use of vehicle. Why? Ease of access and ease of use. Not only that, these kinds of attacks also regularly occur already within the country. So we can learn from what's done already to manage those, and we'll cover that later on. When we look at firearms or homemade bombs, IEDs, the like, it's very easy to become confused by that or start panicking when looking at. They're very, very rare in the UK. And where do they generally tend to occur? By and large, it is on public transport infrastructure. Why? Because of density of people in a very small area, the lack of controls getting into those places, and the inability for people to get off once they're in that environment. So again, we'll focus on knives and vehicles. Yes, you can also include firearms, or particularly fire again, because arson is potentially one, on your risk assessment. So the easier way to break down your risk assessment is to look at adversary, action, and asset. That allows you to break it into three sections. For instance, person with a knife stabs a member of staff at the reception area, because it allows you to look at then, so how are they going to do it, where are they going to do it, and what will that entail? That allows it a much simplified process to make it easy for you to understand. We're then going to look at the threat and vulnerability, which will give us our risk. And as we've touched on, the threat, the who, the why, the how, and who, the what, where, how, and why. And again, looking at, do incidents regularly happen where we are, what kind of people there are around us, what kinds of things have happened previously, and our vulnerability, potentially what exposes us. Is it because we have multiple ways of getting into our premises, very few controls on controlling who can come in and where? Do we share it with another organisation? Again, all those kind of things, do we have a large frontage, a large smoking area, a large outdoor drinking area, that sort of thing? That gives indication of why we're vulnerable, potentially why we're not vulnerable, because you might already have a very good culture building on your fire and emergency plans. You already regular control. You've got the human situational awareness of people looking out for things that out of place and challenging them. Particularly if we look at concert venues, the like, they've got stewards and security staff outside already doing that situational awareness, detecting and responding to potential incidents. That then provides us with a risk. In this one, we're not using a matrix to score the risk. This is just to explain the practicalities to you. But organisations with a more mature approach can potentially use that and look at using a matrix to score it out. Again, a 9x9 grid. Sorry, correction, a 3x3 grid. Again, that would indicate to you wherever it falls on there, if you've got medium threat but low vulnerability, that would come adhere to that scoring criteria. But by and large, we're talking here the simple terms. If you determine you've got a low threat and low vulnerability, low risk, medium threat, medium vulnerability, medium risk. We're keeping it in very simple terms to start with. So once you've got your risk, you can look at what control measures you have in place already to reduce that risk, or you could put in place to reduce the risk. And this is simple ones. And this is what we're going to cover in the next sections. And as we've said, learn from locations where incidents already occur. We've seen that. We're looking at pubs, they have bloody door staff outside. What they're doing situational awareness, observing, detecting and responding to incidents. The same with having reception staff, concierge staff. All these organisations have already got measures in place to deter acts of violence from already occurring. And the same with looking at the arrangement of street furniture, measures put in place around outdoor seating and terraces. Again, to control that space and again limit the ability of a vehicle or something else to encroach upon it. And we also need to touch on the fact it's not our job to aid the police in gathering evidence. So again, if you're obtaining advice from police, counter-terrorism security advisors, there might be a heavy focus on hostile vehicle mitigation, or they'll advise you on what things blunted a major terrorist attack. We're looking at reasonable and proportionate. You're not putting in place measures to withstand a large vehicle bomb for the majority of organisations. Some organisations, yes, based upon their risk assessment, particularly larger ones, may have that. And again, as we've said, it's not a question of putting in place measures to aid the police in investigating an incident afterwards. So now we'll move on to the standard tier requirements. This is for premises that have a capacity between 200 and 799. That is staff, customers, visitors, contractors. The volume of people on the premises, the maximum capacity. So there's a requirement to notify and register with the SAA to let them know that you are affected by this. To conduct a risk assessment, as we've just talked about, have this documented, easily available to review. To have an evacuation plan, how you're going to move people out of the building in an event of an emergency. Evacuation, getting people into the building or moving them around parts of the building. And again, those two parts very much already in fire plans. So if you've got existing plans, build off them. A lockdown plan, securing the building. And again, a communication plan, how you're going to let people know what you're doing and why. So looking in really simple terms, you imagine there was a fire in your premises, you can enact your evacuation plan. You can tell people there's an incident, we all need to leave the premises. You might sound your fire alarm. Exactly, there you are. Then moving people and controlling them out the premises. An evacuation, moving people to other parts of the premises, something already largely covered in lots of fire plans. Communicating. Is it my word of mouth, depending on the size of the venue? An internal alarm, a PA system. And again, a lockdown. Looking in simple terms, if you had a large aggressive dog outside the premises, what would you do? Everybody stay inside. We're going to lock the doors, cover the windows, and wait till emergency services arrive. So it's those sorts of things, simple terms, building off what you already have in place. And you've got requirement to staff awareness. There is free training provided by the Protect initiative of the Act Terrorism Awareness that you can access. And again, to conduct training for staff, conducting those drills, as you most likely do for your fire and emergency planning, responding to the fire alarm, evacuation, lockdown. So having those training drills conducted, recording it, and again, documenting where you've made adjustments to make sure what works and what doesn't work. But again, commonality is key. with your existing fire and safety and emergency plans. Also, it's important to make sure your plans are clear, short, and simple. The simpler they are to understand, the simpler they will be to implement. So we're now going to look at the enhanced tier requirements. This is for locations with a capacity of 800 plus. And again, as we touched on, that's people on site, customers, staff, visitors, whoever it is. There's a requirement to have a designated senior responsible person who's accountable for this. It's always a good idea to have that designated person, somebody who actually manages this and understands it, so that when they're challenged or have to explain it or to demonstrate ownership, they don't have to go 3 times down the line to say, well, actually, it's not me. This is the actual person who manages it. So if you've got somebody who is very competent and capable in security, fire, emergency planning, who understands those already, it's much better to have them designated as the person responsible. They already have ownership. They can explain it. They can demonstrate how you achieve compliance and how it's proportionate to your risk. And that enables you to withstand challenges and also better have confidence it will work for you. So there's a requirement for us to have all the standard tier measures. And as you can see there in the triangle, those standard tier measures are all factored in to enhance awareness, enhance the ability to detect, and enhance the ability to respond to an incident, which is the key. There's also a requirement to have monitoring means in place. Now, for some larger organisations, that could be CCTV, but only if it's monitored live. If it's not monitored live, it doesn't monitor. It's an evidence gathering tool. The strongest part of that is the human situational awareness, having human beings who are observing, watching, seeing things that are going on. The power of hello. They're challenging people when something looks out of place, detecting it, and they're responding to it when something occurs, enabling the organisation to enact measures to evacuate, lockdown. Yes, for some organisations, larger ones, there may be a requirement to adjust or augment CCTV provisions, but by and large, the most effective tool is the human situational awareness. Access control, limiting the means of getting into your premises outside of a controlled way. So again, making sure that as you look at potentially restaurants, pubs, hotels, it's potentially having door staff outside or concierges, reception staff, controlling who comes in, checking what they're there for, limiting the ability for somebody to get in who has no reason to be there. And again, making a decision and detection on what that person appears to be. Do they appear to have a lawful reason to be there? And in some cases, that may mean as well, pushing the envelope of your boundaries again, pushing it, the limits of detection again, standoff distance, so that you can detect something occurring potentially as far away from your premises as possible. Now, access control as well, that means making sure you've got other doors secured, windows locked, so you're not providing another way of getting into your premises. So again, limiting it to that primary point of entry and exit. It's important to remember here, again, fire doors and the like, you've got a requirement to ensure fire doors are accessible. This is why we talk about that commonality with fire, making sure you're not conflicting with other regulatory requirements. Then there's also physical safety and security measures, putting things in to harden your location. This doesn't mean putting in place huge search arches and bomb blast barriers. For some locations at the very high end of the threat, there will be requirement to implement some measures to augment protection from this. But for the majority of locations, this could be putting barriers in place, using the street furniture, the planters to channel people, to limit the ways people can get closer to your premises without being challenged. And again, if we look at what happened in Liverpool, where the vehicle drove into a crowd of people, they were using a vehicle to block access and to form a barrier. That's something you can do, but again, you need to make sure, unlike what happened there, it's rapidly put back in place to limit access to people who are not approved. And when we talk about things, you'll hear a lot of hostile vehicle mitigation and glazing. So looking at glazing, again, heavy-duty curtains and laminate coatings for windows work just as well. So it's about proportionality of measures you enact. There's no requirement to go and put in place hugely onerous measures that in fact limit your ability to do your business and don't really reduce your risk. So again, it's understanding the threat around you, understanding what you can put in place. And it might be you don't actually own that part of the frontage, it's local authority. So you need to have, when you've assessed your risk, potentially challenge other organisations and say, actually, there's a risk here, but you're responsible for it. There's also a requirement for security of information. What this means is your plan, such as your plan for Martyn's Law, the measures you're going to put in place and enact, are controlled. You're aware of who can access them and how, and limiting that to people who don't need to know. Now, you're always going to have emergency plans on site, again, telling people what to do and where to go in the event of a fire. You're not going to change that, again, but it's important to know, again, how things are accessed. So particularly, architects' plans online. Again, if you're a public body that required to respond to FOIs, you're not sharing this sort of information. Again, understanding what you've got and where it is. But again, having simple plans like emergency exits, that won't contain information for somebody coming to look to conduct a reconnaissance in your location. Again, it will look perfectly like a standard emergency plan with your emergency exits and what to do in the event of an emergency. Commonality is key. So the benefits of having a security plan. This is a short document again. It sets out who you are, what you do, and how you do to give somebody a picture, particularly when they're coming to do an inspection. It then details your risk assessment, your findings of that, any mitigation measures you put in place. Details then your steps for evacuation, lockdown, communication, training records, and for enhanced tiers, detailing off your monitoring measures, your access control measures, public safety and security measures, and security of information. Why? Provides clarity. It's easy to read, easy to understand. It demonstrates that you have ownership of your problem. Shows commonality with your emergency and fire plans so that you can then make sure they're not conflicting with each other. It allows staff to react faster because there's ease of understanding, ease of putting it together. And for compliance, it proves readiness. It shows you've taken ownership of the requirements. You've demonstrated how they are proportionate to your level of assessed risk and how the plan is effective to enable you to enact a response to it. And it's cost effective. It allows you to build incrementally to adjustments in line with changes to the environment. And it focuses on areas you can influence, so identifies if there's a risk that falls outside your ownership, that falls under another organisation that's co-located. So if you look at something potentially like a stadium where people have flats that border onto it, they could scale out of window and come down there. Some in there you can identify, but you don't have ownership of it. You need to raise that with somebody else. But also, by having ownership and understanding it, you can explain it, you can account for it, and withstand challenges, which is particularly important when you realise you will likely always be sued regardless of the outcome. People will sue you simply because they were exposed to fear of the incident. And we look at here in the triangle. Why? Because by giving people capabilities, it enhances their confidence, it builds that security culture, which is vital, and in turn enhances the preparedness of your organisation, which is key to having an effective plan that is easy to implement. So I'd like to touch on now some of the things we'll already see, given that we've already seen a large number of organisations trying to sell people, particularly onerous tools and measures. So this gate is located outside the Hull City Football Stadium. On the side facing the camera, away from the camera, is the stadium. It can still be accessed a multitude of ways that are not controlled. On the opposite side of this gate, there's a hospital visible to the right. The footpath goes over 2 railway lines and heads into the city centre. It was used as a cut through all the time, but predominantly very busy on match days. So this gate was put in place by the stadium management company following advice from Humberside Police. But you look at it and say, to what measure, what does it achieve? An attack's more likely to happen when the bridge is full of people, when the gate's open. It's unlikely to happen on Tuesday morning when there's 3 people there. The footbridge is still accessible from the other side. Somebody could go on the bridge and throw a concrete slab at a train passing underneath, likely to be a severe incident. It can be scaled, it can be climbed over, it's not monitored and detected the environment. So you look at and say the same result could have been achieved on match days by using the CCTV at the stadium, the stewards that are present to monitor activity, but also the fact that beyond that gate is the responsibility of the local authority. So it's again touching on that factor of why the human element, situational awareness and communication are the most important parts. Be aware of people trying to sell you a tool, be that a physical measure or software, that they say will make you compliant. Okay, a tool should always support the human element, and be wary of people trying to sell you tools because they tell you they're an expert and you need it. Ownership allows you to make decisions based on your assessment of the risk. And just to touch on that further, we look at here in this slide. So many people have seen these already. These were golf ball detectors. Whether they actually detect golf balls is another issue. This gentleman sold these after the invasion of Iraq to the Iraqi government and lots of other governments, earned millions of pounds from it, telling them that these would detect explosives. So this just shows you to be aware of what people are offering you. As we've touched on, again, people will always outperform technology. The basis is on having tools that support people to enable them to deter, detect, and respond, building on that awareness, human situational awareness. People can see what's going on around them, they can make a decision and respond to it rapidly and appropriately. You've got challenges here that we'll always see people trying to sell you something for compliance, and be aware that what we've seen previously, particularly the public sector with lone worker devices and body cameras for non-security staff and the like, is there'll be a temptation for compliance sake. A tool will achieve compliance. It won't achieve compliance without that human element of being able to understand what it is, what it does, and how it supports them. So looking at the compliance side of it, obviously to be aware of what's likely to happen. The SIA will measure compliance. They will not give advice and tell you your plan is good or bad, it will work or it won't work. They're to measure, have you complied with the requirements? Have you registered? Do you have a security plan in place? Is it available to be inspected? Do you have documented evacuation, lockdown, and communication plans? For enhanced tier locations, have you documented your monitoring, access control, physical safety and security measures, your security of information, and how they pertain to your level of assessed risk? And that's important. It's your level of assessed risk and how you respond to an incident. There is not a set level that says you must adhere to this response for this level of risk. Your training drill and emergency planning, sort of your training and emergency response drills you've conducted. So showing people have conducted training that's available for them, be that the act awareness online, and also the records of drills you've conducted. Now, as we've touched on with that security plan, having a coherent plan in place allows you to explain the proportionality of your measures, how they mitigate your level of assessed risk, how they enable you to respond to that and put your plan into action. The better you can do that, not only will you better be able to evidence compliance, but the better you will have confidence your plan will work if an incident occurs. And as we said, build off your existing fire and emergency plans. You're treating the incident as an emergency. And again, as we've said, the inspectors will verify compliance, not quality. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation. So just to touch on the services we offer in relation to Martyn's Law, we also provide online workshops that will better enable you to understand and implement your requirements for Martyn's Law. These you can conduct at your own pace and go over them. So again, it just provides you with that additional knowledge and guidance in a greater level of understanding with additional depth of material. We also provide face-to-face and bespoke workshops to again give you additional clarity, guidance and reassurance in conducting, putting your plans together, putting your mitigation measures in place so that again you can have confidence and ownership. We also provide consultancy services to ensure that you're ready to meet the requirements of Martyn's Law for your organisation, for your level of assessed risk, and measures proportionate to your organisation. And again, if you'd like a copy of this presentation, please get in touch with us. Our contact details are below. And again, I'd just like to reiterate the key takeaways from this. Put terrorism to the back of your mind. That will be determined after it's happened. Deal with it as an emergency. Use the commonality between your existing fire and emergency plans because they complement each other. They should work together and should feature the same items in there because, again, if we look at fire, it's got already your requirement for evacuation, communication. So building off those existing things for simplicity. The main key takeaway is human situational awareness and communication. Having well-trained staff able to understand and operate enables them to be aware of what's going on around them, to deter potential hostile acts, to detect them, and also to enable the organisation to respond quickly and effectively. And again, the measures you put in place are proportionate and reasonable to your level of assessed risk. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this informative.